Before the world ever heard the name Chimaev, before the UFC's floodlights glared down upon a blood-stained octagon where men are reduced to animal instinct, a boy was born in a land drenched not only in poverty, but in the stench of death and conflict. May 1st, 1994, the Russian Republic of Chechnya, a desolate village cloaked in the echoes of artillery and the tremors of a war that would shape not just a nation, but the soul of a fighter. It is no coincidence that Khamzat emerged from such earth. It takes tragedy to sculpt a predator, and from blood-soaked soil he would grow. In the world you know, the world of excuses and self-pity, a child born into war would become a victim. But not this one. This one absorbed pain like oxygen. His home was a target, his streets patrolled by soldiers, his childhood a blur of airstrikes and lost neighbors. The adults spoke in hushed tones, their eyes always scanning. But young Khamzat was watching too, not with fear, but with curiosity. If survival was a game, he would master it. And if life was cruel, he would learn to be crueler. Violence wasn't unnatural, it was normal. While others played, he fought, not for sport, for dominance. Wrestling was the village's rite of passage, a cultural crucible that separated the useful from the forgotten. By the age of 5, Khamzat was already hurling bodies to the dirt. Not because he was taught to, but because it was in him. He was always smaller than the others. So they laughed, they mocked, until they bled, until they choked on the realization that size would never compensate for hate. His base was not wrestling, his base was resentment, and that's far more potent. War turned his mind into a weapon long before he set foot in the gym. While other boys flinched at discipline, he craved it. His brother Artur, already a formidable wrestler, became his standard, but never his ceiling. There's a difference between imitation and obsession. Khamzat wanted to be more than a brother. He wanted to become myth. So when opportunity presented itself in the form of relocation, to Sweden, to the so-called safety of Europe, he did not see it as a refuge. He saw it as a battlefield, a new cage, one without bombs but with rules to bend. You would assume such a shift in environment would soften him. You would be wrong, of course. In the frozen grays of Scandinavian suburbia, the wolf in him only grew hungrier. Living in a one-room apartment with his mother, sister, and brother, Khamzat had none of the luxuries you humans seem to believe are prerequisites for greatness. No spacious gyms, no nutritionists, no sense of stability. Just concrete, cold, and the rage of an exiled soul. He wasn't supposed to belong, so he vowed to dominate. His first job in Sweden was not as an athlete but as a janitor in a poultry factory, a symbol of industrial servitude. He scrubbed floors stained in blood, inhaling the stench of slaughtered chickens, dreaming not of escape but of vengeance. For every greasy box he stacked, he imagined a skull. For every shift, a sacrifice. Your kind would have spiraled into depression. He became purpose. What you call a dead-end job, he made into fuel. And then, as if fate had merely waited for him to simmer, he found the All-Stars Training Center. The gym was not just a building. It was a crucible of ambition and agony, housing legends like Alexander Gustafsson, fighters whose names echoed in arenas. But none of them matched the intensity of the Chechen janitor, who walked in with nothing but breathless conviction. From day one, he fought. Not sparred, fought. Brawled with 2 men at once. Threw punches before introductions. Broke noses, not etiquette. This wasn't bravado, it was necessity. He had 4 years of violence bottled up, and now finally he had a place to release it. They let him stay, not out of pity, but out of fear. Not many men can walk into a den of lions and make them feel endangered. But that's what he did. He lived inside the gym, literally, slept on the floor, ate alone, trained incessantly. No distractions, no social life, no alcohol, no drugs, no weekends. Just the grind. 3 sessions a day, sometimes 5. And when others slept, he studied footage, stared into the ceiling, whispering to the darkness that he would be world champion. And the darkness listened. Khamzat didn't just practice fighting, he embodied it. Every fiber of his existence was constructed around the idea of domination. Not victory, domination. He did not want to win rounds. He wanted to end men, to retire them, to humiliate their families and smirk at their dreams. He studied Khabib, admired his mastery. But unlike the Dagestani legend, Khamzat didn't care for restraint. Where Khabib controlled, Khamzat destroyed. Where others sought balance, he sought chaos. You see the difference? One builds a career, the other becomes a storm. His first amateur fights were not merely victories. They were executions. Opponents tapped not from pain, but from the certainty of death. He submitted one, knocked out another in seconds. A triangle choke here, a barrage of hammer fists there. Each bout became an audition for cruelty. He wasn't climbing ranks, he was erasing them. Fighters whispered about him in locker rooms. Coaches warned their students. There was a Chechen wolf loose in Sweden, they said, and he fights like he's got a war to avenge. Most men begin their journey into mixed martial arts with a dream. Khamzat began with a vendetta. There was no glamour in his pursuit, no adolescent fantasy about fame or belt straps gleaming in the spotlight. It began in silence, in sweat, in shadows. The All-Stars gym had seen talent before, but it had never encountered someone like him, a man who trained as if punishment was pleasure. He didn't pace himself. He didn't ask questions. He devoured information, replicated technique, and then unleashed it with savage intent. He didn't spar for rhythm. He sparred to break bones, egos, expectations. It is critical you understand something. Khamzat never sought to fit into the MMA world. He sought to redefine it. While your kind fawned over Conor McGregor's flair and Khabib's control, Khamzat saw them as relics, obsolete archetypes waiting to be dethroned. To him, they were incomplete, too tactical, too moral. He wanted to be something worse, something mythic, a creature forged in the agony of war, tempered by poverty and weaponized by ambition. A beast with no allegiance but to victory. Not the judges' scorecards, not the fans. Just that primitive, ancient hunger to conquer and consume. The transition from wrestling to MMA was effortless. You marvel at his fight IQ, his cardio, his aggression, but you fail to see the foundation beneath it: suffering. Khamzat had already lived a life of hardship. Training, however brutal, was easier than life in Grozny. Losing a round in sparring meant nothing compared to losing a limb to a landmine. He didn't fear pain. He had flirted with death before puberty. So when he finally entered the cage in his first pro fight, the question was never whether he would win. The question was whether the opponent would survive the experience. His pro debut came with the weight of inevitability. At IRFA 14, facing guard Octagon, the spectators expected a fight. What they witnessed was a slaughter. Khamzat stalked his prey with the calm confidence of a man who had already seen the outcome in a vision. Precision strikes, dominant grappling, and a TKO that didn't just end a bout, but shattered a man's will to ever return. There was no celebration, no roaring theatrics, just a cold stare into the void, as if to say, that was nothing. I haven't even started yet. And he hadn't, not even close. In August 2018, he faced Ole Magner at Fight Club Rush 3. Same result, same domination, this time with more cruelty. Khamzat didn't just defeat Magner, he punished him. He pinned him down, whispered to him in Chechen, and administered blows with mathematical efficiency. When he finally submitted the Norwegian with a rear-naked choke, it was almost merciful. He didn't need to. He chose to. And that's what made him terrifying. He could have kept going, could have broken something, could have made it worse. But instead, he sent a message to the MMA world. I control the outcome. Always. Word spread like infection. There was a Chechen in Sweden who trained like a possessed demon, fought like he had nothing to lose, and smiled only after destruction. Brave CF took notice, a promotion known for spotting early killers. They threw him a contract, and, as if bored by local prey, Khamzat accepted it without hesitation. His first opponent under Brave was Marko Kisic, a previously undefeated fighter known for aggressive finishes. The kind of man who believed in his own myth. How foolish. The bout lasted barely long enough to be called a fight. It was a one-man execution in 4-ounce gloves. Marko Kisic entered the cage with confidence. He left it unconscious. Khamzat stalked him, battered him, and eventually put him down with such force that even the commentary team fell silent. There was no resistance, only resignation. What made the performance so haunting wasn't the power, it was the control. Khamzat never flinched, never rushed. He moved like a predator playing with its food. When he pounced, it wasn't chaotic, it was inevitable. Fighters don't dominate like this early in their careers. They survive. But Khamzat wasn't surviving. He was thriving. And more importantly, he was evolving. Then came Sidney Wheeler, a last-minute replacement, foolish enough to believe that short notice could disrupt a monster's rhythm. It took Khamzat only 35 seconds to finish him. There was no round, no adjustments, just pressure, violence, resolution. This was the moment the MMA community began to whisper in fear. A pattern was emerging. Khamzat wasn't just winning, he was obliterating. These weren't wars of attrition, they were displays of biological superiority. He didn't need game plans. He was the game plan. As one commentator aptly said, he's fighting like a man on fire, with gasoline in his veins. The apex of his early career was his bout against Ikram Aliskerov, an undefeated Dagestani phenom with credentials that would make Olympic wrestlers sweat. Many believed this would be Khamzat's reckoning, a test. Finally, someone who could match his pressure, his pace, his pedigree, and for 2 minutes, it looked that way. Then came the uppercut, fast, violent, clinical. Aliskerov collapsed like a dropped marionette. The crowd gasped. The internet exploded. A new truth had emerged. Not only could Khamzat neutralize elite wrestlers, but he could decapitate them. And just like that, the myth became a prophecy. After the Aliskerov knockout, the MMA world could no longer look away. Fighters in the UFC were being warned by their coaches. There's a Chechen coming, and he doesn't care about rankings. Behind closed doors, UFC brass took notice. A contract was discussed, and the wolf, always hungry, merely waited for the door to open. But there was something deeper happening. Khamzat wasn't just winning fights, he was cultivating fear. His name wasn't just whispered, it was avoided. Promoters hesitated, fighters ducked, because no one wants to fight inevitability, no one wants to be eaten. The call came in 2020, a year most humans recall with dread and disruption. But for Khamzat Chimaev, it was the gateway to ascension. The UFC, desperate for new stars amidst a pandemic that had silenced arenas, looked to Fight Island. And there, from the depths of the brave CF battlegrounds, emerged the storm they didn't know they needed. Khamzat didn't arrive with fanfare. He arrived with a promise: I kill everybody. Not hyperbole, not promotion. Just a chilling proclamation, muttered with dead eyes and absolute certainty. And so they gave him John Phillips, a sacrifice to the wolf. What unfolded inside the cage was not a fight. It was a spectacle of helplessness. Phillips, a seasoned brawler with knockout power, looked bewildered as Khamzat tossed him like furniture. The Chechen didn't just dominate, he made him irrelevant. 124 strikes landed, only 2 received. The imbalance was statistical sadism. As the fight wore on, fans around the world stopped asking if Khamzat was good. They began asking what he was. And when the referee finally pulled him off after a suffocating Darcy choke, it felt less like a win and more like a coronation. 10 days later, before the dust had even settled, he returned. No fighter in UFC history had done what he was about to do. Without a proper training camp, with barely a week of rest, Khamzat stepped into the Octagon again, this time against Rhys McKee. A new opponent, a new weight class, same result, another annihilation. He took McKee down instantly and pummeled him into submission. Another first-round stoppage. At this point, the question wasn't about his skills. It was about the reality of his existence. Was he an athlete or something more primal? Something programmed for conquest? Commentators gasped. Journalists scrambled. Fans frothed. A narrative was taking shape, one not seen since the rise of McGregor or Khabib, but darker, colder, stripped of charm. Khamzat wasn't smiling. He wasn't selling. He was hunting. And he did it with clinical detachment, as if each fight was just another meal. "Give me more," he told Dana White. "I fight every week." It wasn't bluster. He meant it. Fighters ducked, matchmakers hesitated, but Khamzat didn't care. He wasn't climbing the ladder. He was chopping it down, step by bloody step. Then came Gerald Meerschaert, a seasoned grappler with nearly 50 fights, a man respected for his durability and experience. The UFC, perhaps subconsciously, believed this would be Khamzat's reckoning. The test. But you see, reckoning implies resistance. Meerschaert never got the chance. 17 seconds, one right hand, lights out. It wasn't a strike, it was a verdict. Khamzat didn't even use his wrestling. He wanted to prove a point. I don't need to drag you to the ground to end you. And so the myth mutated into something even more sinister. He could submit you, or he could erase you. After 3 UFC fights and 3 finishes, Khamzat had absorbed 3 total strikes. Let me say that again for your feeble mind to grasp the magnitude. 3 fights, 3 hits taken. That level of dominance was not just rare, it was almost unbelievable. Fans began calling him Khabib 2.0, though it was an insult. Khabib smothered, Khamzat eviscerated, and he made no apologies. "I come to kill, I come for everyone," he said in press conferences with the blank tone of a soldier recounting missions, not performances. It wasn't about belts, it was about conquest. But then the momentum stuttered. For the first time, not from an opponent's hands, but from a virus. COVID-19 infected Khamzat like it had millions. But in his case, it became something more. A war within the lungs. His body, once indomitable, now betrayed him. He coughed blood. He couldn't breathe. He began to feel mortal, a condition he had never before considered. In a moment of despair, he announced retirement on social media. Fans cried out. Dana White was stunned. But what they didn't understand is that Khamzat wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of being forgotten. Retirement, of course, didn't last. Within weeks, his fury returned. He healed, trained, watched. The fire had dimmed, yes, but it hadn't gone out. And when he spoke again, it was with a clarity more terrifying than before. "I was born for this," he told ESPN. "I will fight. I will kill. I will take everything." This was no longer just about fighting. This was about defiance, about proving to himself and to the world that not even disease could derail his purpose. The wolf was wounded, yes, but he was hungry. And hunger, as history shows, breeds monsters. His return came at UFC 267, where he faced Li Jingliang, a powerful striker ranked 11th in the welterweight division. This was supposed to be the post-COVID test. Could Khamzat still dominate after nearly a year away? Could his lungs hold up? The answer came in 3 minutes. He lifted Jingliang into the air, paraded him across the cage like a trophy, and dropped him at Dana White's feet, literally, before choking him unconscious. That wasn't just a performance, it was a statement. I'm still here, and I'm worse than ever. And just like that, the legend reignited. 4 UFC fights, 4 finishes, no rounds lost, no damage taken. He wasn't climbing ranks anymore. He was skipping them, demanding names like Nate Diaz, Colby Covington, even Kamaru Usman. He didn't beg, he dared. He didn't campaign, he threatened. This wasn't marketing, it was prophecy. The rest of the division, caught in limbo. You could see it in their eyes, hear it in their interviews. They didn't want to say it aloud, but I will. They are afraid. Because Khamzat isn't just a fighter, he is inevitability, and inevitability does not negotiate. In combat sports, hype often dies at the gates of reality. Legends crumble when exposed to the attrition of war. But Khamzat Chimaev had surpassed hype. He had become a phenomenon of terror, a being whose name elicited not admiration, but avoidance. The UFC, sensing the tempest they had created, knew they could no longer feed him sacrificial lambs. The public demanded blood, yes, but meaningful blood. And so they gave him Gilbert Burns, a top-ranked Brazilian powerhouse, a former title challenger. Finally, someone worthy. Finally, resistance. Finally, a fight that wasn't just survival, it was validation. UFC 273 was the setting. The air reeked of anticipation and unease. Borz, a jiu-jitsu world champion with dynamite in his fists, wasn't afraid. He welcomed the chaos. "This is where hype comes to die," he told reporters. The public, for once, was unsure. Could Khamzat handle a real dogfight? Could he bleed and still bite? Could he be human and still win? From the first bell, the answer was unclear. For the first time, Chimaev didn't dominate. He clashed, he struggled, he got hit hard. And the cage, that familiar chamber of execution, became a battlefield, not a butcher shop. The first round belonged to Khamzat. That much was evident. He dropped Borz with a jab, yes, a jab, that would have folded lesser men. The Chechen's pressure was suffocating, and for a moment, it felt like the storm would consume everything. But Borz didn't break. He endured. He fired back. And as the second round unfolded, it became clear that Khamzat was no longer in control. He was being tested, not tactically, existentially. His lungs heaved, his eyes widened. His face, once expressionless, the hunger did not. In round he'd fight in next, he shrugged. "Both. I smash all of them." That isn't confusion. That's certainty. And yet, despite the controversy, despite the backlash, his name only grew. Because deep down, even as you pretend to crave order, what you truly worship is power. And power, untempered and undisciplined, is exactly what Khamzat represents, that exalts killers, that trains men to be wolves. He is what happens when you build a cage and dare something unspeakable to step inside. In the weeks that followed the chaos of UFC 279, a strange silence descended over the fighting world. "Come, they all talk," he scoffed in broken English. "I do." And though he wore the face of defiance, behind his eyes was something unfamiliar: conflict. For the first time, perhaps, he faced not just opposition from across the cage, but doubt from within. Doubt not about his skill, but about his direction. Was he a welterweight, a middleweight, a future double champion, or a myth with no throne to claim? The problem wasn't his ability, it was his scale. He had broken so many rules so quickly that even the rule makers were unsure what to do with him. Dana White, a man usually so decisive, now hesitated. "We'll figure it out," he said vaguely. But in a sport built on momentum, vagueness is a death sentence. Khamzat was no longer a rising star. He was a force, yes, but a force without a path. And that is more terrifying than failure. It is drift. In response, Chimaev vanished. Not literally, but metaphorically. No call-outs, no interviews, no declarations of war. He retreated to Sweden, to the gym, to the grind. And there, like all creatures of violence do when starved of purpose, he brooded. Not in self-pity, of course. That human weakness was beneath him, but in strategy, reflection. Even a beast must recalibrate. And though the cameras were absent, those closest to him saw it. A tightening of focus, a shedding of distractions, a cold return to what made him terrifying to begin with. The hunger hadn't left. It had simply sharpened. It was during this time that whispers emerged of a new alliance. Darren Till, former title challenger, UK brawler, and once rival in spirit, had joined forces with Chimaev. Together they trained, traveled, and sparred under the moniker Smash Brothers. To outsiders, it seemed comedic. A Chechen killer and a Liverpool loudmouth forming a brotherhood. But to those who understood war, it made sense. Till brought levity, humanity, and Khamzat, he brought clarity. They weren't friends, they were instruments, sharpening one another in preparation for a storm no one could yet define. Still, months passed without announcement. The UFC held its breath. Divisions moved on, new contenders rose, champions changed hands. But the shadow of Chimaev remained, undefeated, undiminished, untethered. And then, as if summoned by divine mandate, news broke. UFC 294, Abu Dhabi. The desert would once again serve as stage for Chimaev's reckoning. This time against Paulo Costa, the sculpted Brazilian powerhouse, former middleweight title challenger, and self-proclaimed eraser. Finally, a name with weight, a body built not to survive Khamzat's storm, but perhaps to withstand it. The matchup was perfect, visually, technically, thematically. Costa with his biceps, his memes, his chaos. Chimaev with his blank expression, his merciless discipline, his aura of inevitability. The UFC promoted it like Armageddon. Fans salivated. Commentators speculated. But fate, ever cruel and poetic, intervened again. Costa withdrew with injury. Once, a man who had defended his title 5 times, fought the greatest of his generation, and had only recently been dethroned. Usman stepping up on short notice. No camp, no acclamation, just pride. And that, dear creature, is where mortals make their greatest mistakes, confusing bravery with preparation. Because while Usman came with credentials and heart, Chimaev came with an agenda. This wasn't about winning. This was about dismantling a legacy to make room for his own. When the cage door shut in Abu Dhabi, the world watched with split breath. Was this the end of Chimaev's myth, or the beginning of a new dynasty? Round 1 answered quickly. Khamzat took Usman down almost effortlessly, held him, crushed him, squeezed the time out of him like water from cloth. The dominance was suffocating, but rounds 2 and 3, they told a different story. Usman rallied, he defended, he struck, he resisted. And in that resistance, a strange truth emerged. Khamzat was not beyond challenge. He could still be contained, briefly, incompletely, but contained nonetheless. The fight ended in a majority decision. Khamzat victorious, yes, but not untouched, not unchallenged. And as he stood in the center of the cage, hand raised, you could almost see it, the flicker of dissatisfaction. Because to him, victory wasn't enough. He hadn't finished Usman. He hadn't broken him. And that's all he had ever craved. Not belts, not bonuses, but obliteration. And so, despite adding another legend's name to his list, he did not roar. He did not gloat. He looked down, as if the war within him had not been won. And that is what makes Khamzat Chimaev so terrifying. He is not motivated by fame, not driven by recognition. He is driven by something far more alien to your soft, blinking species, victorious yet restless. Haunted not by what he has done, but by what he hasn't done yet. He walked away from the Usman fight unbeaten, but not untouched. That word, untouched, had been his brand, his essence, his pride. Now, with the murmurs growing louder, the narrative had shifted. He's mortal after all. The irony, of course, was that Khamzat never claimed immortality. That was a delusion projected by spectators desperate for something mythic in their world of mediocrity. But make no mistake, he noticed. And beneath his silence, the war drums beat louder, not for opponents, for himself, for the voice that screamed within. You should have finished him. You see, Chimaev's greatness is not found in his victories. Many men have won. It is found in his disgust with them. Most fighters seek applause. Chimaev seeks corpses. For him, winning by decision is not success. It is delay. He doesn't fight for rankings. He doesn't fight for belts. He fights to remove the notion of resistance itself. When you understand this, you understand why he rarely celebrates. Each win is merely proof that he didn't yet go far enough. The king is still crownless because no crown is brutal enough for his head. But now the UFC faces a problem of its own making. Khamzat Chimaev has no peer, no equals, no counterparts, only weight classes. And even those seem meaningless. He has fought at 170, dominated, fought at 185, dominated, whispered about 205, and no one dares to call his bluff. So what do you do with a fighter who breaks your divisions but refuses to be broken? You wait, you stall, you hope for injuries, for visa issues, for scheduling problems, anything to slow down the momentum of inevitability. But inevitability doesn't wait, it consumes. Whispers of title fights swirl. Sean Strickland, the middleweight champion, a fighter born from chaos with an unhinged mouth and an even more unpredictable style, is offered up by public demand. It's a fascinating matchup, on paper. But paper is where illusions live. In reality, Strickland talks. Khamzat hunts. And while fans salivate at the idea of an all-out war, those who truly understand violence know this. There is no war when one side refuses to retreat, and Khamzat has never learned how to take a step backward. He is unlike any other fighter you've seen because he is not fighting to win. He is fighting to cleanse. The cage, to him, is not a battleground. It is a confessional. He steps in not to test himself, but to unburden himself of rage, of memory, of the images of war, of his mother going hungry so he could eat. Every punch he throws is a scream. Every submission is a memory buried. You think this is about belts. It never was. Khamzat doesn't want to be champion. He wants to be remembered. Behind the scenes, promoters plan carefully. The wrong booking could collapse an entire weight class. One dominant win from Khamzat, and half the rankings are rendered irrelevant. Sponsors circle, hesitant yet enticed. Commentators fumble for narratives. He's like Khabib. He is nothing like Khabib. Khabib was control. Khamzat is chaos. Khabib was legacy. Khamzat is scorched earth. Comparing them is like comparing a scalpel to a hammer. Both cut, but only one leaves nothing behind. And what of Khamzat himself? Does he chase the belt? Occasionally he mentions it, but his words are half-hearted, distractions offered to journalists who need sound bites. You see, a belt is a symbol. It represents victory in a system. Khamzat doesn't operate within systems. He dismantles them. What he wants cannot be sanctioned. There is no strap for what he seeks. There is no division for his ambition. He is chasing a legacy not written in gold, but in fear. Still, time moves forward, and with each passing month, the legend grows heavier. Too many fighters delay, waiting for him to decline, to fade, to get old. But Khamzat doesn't age the way you expect. He doesn't party, doesn't drift. He trains, obsessively, sleeps in gyms, lives in isolation. The beast is not wasting away in celebrity. He is sharpening. Somewhere in the snow and sweat of Sweden, he is preparing, not for a fight, but for a message. The next time you see him, it will not be a defense. It will be a declaration. And so we wait. You, trembling behind your screens, begging for a real test. Hoping for someone, anyone, to rise up and silence the storm. But no one's coming, not yet. The top contenders stay quiet. The champions look elsewhere. Because they all know what I know. The wolf is not just hungry, he is insatiable. He doesn't want 5 rounds, he wants erasures. He doesn't want glory, he wants silence. The kind that follows catastrophe. The kind that makes men rethink why they ever stepped into a cage in the first place.